Hello everyone, my name is Beth. I'm a second-year political science student, and I want to start this video off by thanking my classmate for inviting me to speak on some very important topics today. Think Out Loud is a very awesome, educational, and positive channel at that, so if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button wherever it is on your screen because you won't regret it and you will learn some stuff. So with that being said, I have been given the platform to speak on sexual violence, rape culture, and consent. There's a 25% chance on campuses of experiencing sexual violence, so when there are laws that are intended to protect individuals from these acts and these crimes, we must question why our numbers are so high, why we must be so scared. First thing I can think to do is just spread awareness on the laws and policies around this issue. So since 1983, sexual violence has been defined under the Criminal Code of Canada as any unwanted sexual activity that violates the sexual integrity of an individual. So this has been defined under a three-level categorization. Level 1 sexual assault refers to any unwanted sexual activity that results in little to no physical injuries to the victim. Level 2 refers to sexual assaults that result in bodily harm, the use of an object potentially, threats to a third party. Level 3 aggravated assault refers to any act that results in the wounding, maiming, disfiguring, or threatens the life of any individual. It's also important to note that there are some folks who enjoy violent sex, and that is completely okay as long as it falls within the Constitution. So under the Criminal Code, an individual cannot consent to their own bodily harm. This is intended to protect the sexual health and autonomy of each individual and ensure that sexual justice is fostered in our justice system. That is federal jurisdiction. As far as university goes, in 2014, St. Mary's University in Halifax issued a report in response to a chant in 2013 by that was at a SMU football game, actually, and this chant invokes some very disturbing language about sexual violence that disregarded consent, and that also had very disturbing language about sexual acts, sexual crimes against minorities. And so in this report, the term affirmative consent was defined. So affirmative consent intends to break down rape myths that place accountability on the victim to provide evidence that a crime was committed against them, and it places the accountability onto the perpetrator of the act. So affirmative consent means that at each stage of a sexual activity, all parties are in agreement and experiencing pleasure. So their sexual integrities are being protected, and anything outside of this falls into sexual violence. According to St. Mary's University, I completely advocate for the implementation of affirmative consent and believe that, honestly, more intervention needs to happen in order to ensure that this is legislated properly and in a way that truly protects victims of sexual violence. There is a toxic rape culture that is shown by the high numbers of sexual violence, and it is important as well to take into account the intersectionality of sexual violence that disproportionately affects certain communities and sexual minorities. So, for example, in Canada, something we should all be aware about is the ongoing sexual violence that is often unheard of in mainstream media for a reason, that is ongoing against Indigenous women and girls. So why is there this silence in Canada? Why aren't these women protected under these Canadian constitutions? We need to question this. We need to question the enforcement And ultimately, we need to advocate for affirmative consent that encourages victims to come out about their experiences and seek the justice they deserve, and create a society where perpetrators are not encouraged to act in this way by a rape culture and be violent. For further inquiry on sexual violence and rape culture on universities and college campuses, you should definitely look into watching The Hunting Ground. It is a documentary that looks into the realities of victim suppression and protection of criminals who have committed sexual violence. Any message I want you to take from this: use your voice to seek justice, to seek peace, to foster peace in your community, and to protect society from these heinous crimes.
Hi guys, my name is Kayla Banks. I am a fourth year student studying criminology and political science. First thing I really want to define is what sexual assault or rape is, and that is the unwanted sexual touching, sexual advances, or even unwanted sexual verbal abuse. That can all range under sexual assault, and I think that's important to highlight because a lot of people don't really consider what we consider catcalling under sexual assault, and if it's not wanted from a woman or a man, it is considered sexual assault, and I think that's important to highlight. Sexual assault in Canada is actually almost the one crime that's not reported the most. 91% of sexual assaults in Canada do not get reported. As we can clearly see, that's very highly problematic. And I'll just tell you a little bit about my experience with this kind of thing. I have experienced an incident that was unwanted on my school campus, unfortunately. It happened a couple years ago, and I really didn't think much about it at that moment, and I don't really think much about it now. But you know, at the time, I knew what was kind of happening. I just like physically didn't know what to do, and personally, I didn't feel confidence in my school to really reprimand the person who committed the offense against me. So I think that's another really big issue, is just having confidence in your school, in the people who work there, to, you know, bring justice to these issues that affect a lot of people, considering there's thousands of students that go to my university and tons of other universities in Canada. So I think that's another issue that's really important to highlight as well, is why sexual assault isn't reported much in Canada. And that's because we, as women and as men, don't feel confidence in our justice system and our police. Personally, myself and other people that I've spoken to, especially minority groups, have not had a good experience with our police system or our justice system. And I think that's highly problematic. They are really only catering to a certain amount of people, and it does not include minority groups, which is hugely problematic because Canada claims to be a multicultural country, but we often see a lot of issues with people from multicultural backgrounds coming forward. The system, it needs to change, not just regarding sexual assault, but really many other things as well. Another huge topic that I might just touch on a bit is definitely education, and education around consent. So mainly in a lot of my classes, we've been speaking about sexual assault, we've been speaking about consent. It's really got me thinking about where the root of this really comes from. And I think that the one thing that individuals can really do is educate themselves, especially at a young age. Like, parents need to educate their kids, and teenagers need to educate themselves, just learning what's proper in society and consent, which is hugely problematic in society right now because people don't understand consent, and then consent isn't used, and that becomes a problem because consent needs to be used in any sexual advances. So I believe that just teaching kids at a young age what consent is, even just teaching your young child, like, oh, you need to ask before you borrow this, or you need to see if that's okay before you take, another child's toy or something like that. And that flows on through the years to become, asking people, is it okay if, like, I kiss you? Is it okay if I hug you? Is it okay if, like, I touch your arm? That's such important, just small mannerisms that people can learn, and then that really flows into giving consent for any sexual practices of any kind. I do have a women's helpline here for anyone who's been a victim of any sort, or even if you've been a victim in the past and want to reach out to somebody. It's a crisis hotline, and it's 24 hours, so anytime you call, somebody will answer. So I'll read off the number here. It is 1-866-863-0511. And just feel free to, like, if you ever need to talk to somebody or speak to somebody, reach out, because majority of the time people are always willing to hear you speak, or you can always call a crisis helpline.
Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea, and I'm excited to talk to you today about rape culture and what a rape culture is. Rape culture is not just a high percentage of sexual assault or sexual harassment cases reported in an area. In fact, though this may help contribute to a rape culture, it does not create it. A rape culture can be in existence without any sexual harassment cases being reported in the area. Instead, a rape culture is when you have societal attitudes contributing to sexual violence and rape against women. These can be things like the music that we listen to, the movies that we watch, the language that we use without even realizing it. Sometimes, for example, in 2013, during the St. Mary's University O Week, which I think we now call Freshman Week, it promoted a rape culture to a large extent. And thankfully, St. Mary's have taken a really big stance against zero violence policy. Actually, I'm quite sure many universities have learned from us, because Dalhousie had an incident not long after, and so on, as well as the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So these are just some things that add to a rape culture that may not have been an intentional use or intentional way to add to the rape culture, but have done so without even thinking about it. That's why it's important for us as students who are continuously learning and growing that we can shape the environment and the world that we are going out into, not just on the university campus, but outside of school as well. It's a little bit scary within 2020, as we are currently living in a pandemic. Without accounting for pandemic numbers, 1 in 3 women and girls experience sexual harassment or some sort of physical violence against them in their lifetime. This is 1/3 of all women. That's absurd. Half of women that are killed worldwide are killed by their partners or family. So this is something that is happening within their own home. It's definitely scary, and it's something that must be acknowledged. These numbers increased in World War II, which is what the United Nations Women really is currently comparing the pandemic to, because they experienced so much sexual violence and sexual harassment during this time that COVID-19 is expected to display the same results. So, for example, the director of the United Nations Women states that the violence that is currently emerging now as a dark feature of this pandemic is a mirror and a challenge to our values, our resilience, and our shared humanity. We must not only survive the coronavirus, but emerge renewed with women as a powerful force at the center of recovery. Which it's important because though we will definitely be suffering economic losses at the end of this pandemic, that cannot be our only focus. And as students, we must fight for something more and acknowledge that we are better because we must do better. There is no other option.